The auctioneer's chant echoed across the gravel lot like a funeral hymn. Going once on this 2018 John Deere A370R, 435 horsepower, 3,200 hours, immaculate condition. Going twice. Tyler Harmon stood at the back of the crowd, arms crossed, jaw set. He didn't flinch when the hammer fell, didn't look away when his father's friends turned to stare. The tractor, his father's tractor, rolled off the platform and disappeared into a buyer's convoy. Next came the 8295R, then the 6155M, then the utility tractors, the planter, the cultivator. Every piece of green iron his father had built over 40 years, liquidated in 3 hours on a cold March morning. By noon, the Harmon family's John Deere legacy was gone, and Tyler Harmon had a cashier's check in his jacket pocket big enough to buy one machine, one Massey Ferguson 8737. The crowd didn't understand. The dealer had warned him. His uncle called him a fool, but Tyler had done the math. He'd run the numbers until his eyes burned. Fuel costs, maintenance intervals, horsepower per dollar, resale be damned. He needed power, and he needed it cheap enough to keep the farm alive. The John Deere fleet had been beautiful, reliable, respected, but it was bleeding him dry. Tyler's father had died 18 months earlier. Heart attack in the shop, wrench still in his hand. The funeral had been standing room only. Half the county showed up. They all said the same thing. Your daddy built something to be proud of. What they didn't say, he built it on credit. When Tyler opened the books, the truth gutted him. His father had been financing equipment upgrades every 2 years, chasing efficiency with borrowed money. The John Deere dealership loved him. The bank tolerated him, but the margins were gone. Corn prices had tanked. Input costs were rising, and the debt service on 6 tractors, even dependable, high resale Deeres, was drowning the operation. Tyler had 2 choices, sell land or sell iron. He chose iron, but he didn't choose another John Deere. He'd been to the Massey Ferguson dealer 3 times before the auction, walked the lot, sat in the cab of the 8737, felt the weight of 370 horsepower under his hands. The dealer, a square-shouldered man named Carl who didn't waste words, laid it out plain. You want power without the premium, Carl said. This machine'll give it to you, but don't expect your neighbors to like it. Tyler didn't care what his neighbors thought. He cared about surviving. The day the Massey Ferguson 8737 rolled onto Harmon land, it felt like an invasion. The truck arrived at dawn. Tyler stood in the driveway, coffee in hand, watching the big red tractor ease down the ramps. It was massive, aggressive. The paint gleamed under the early light, bold and unapologetic. His uncle's truck pulled up 10 minutes later. Gary Harmon got out slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on the Massey. He walked a full circle around it without saying a word. Tyler stayed quiet. Let him look. Finally, Gary spoke. Your daddy's rolling in his grave. Tyler set his coffee down. Daddy's gone. The debt isn't. You think this thing's gonna save you? I think 6 Deeres were killing me. 1 Massey won't. Gary shook his head. Resale's garbage on these. You know that, right? You put 2,000 hours on this machine. Try to trade it in, and the Deere dealer'll laugh you out of the lot. I'm not planning to trade it in. Everyone plans to trade in. Then, I guess I'm different. Gary spit into the gravel. You're different, all right. You're the first Harmon in 3 generations to run anything but green iron. People are talking. Tyler met his uncle's eyes. Let him talk. Gary climbed back in his truck and left without another word. Tyler stood alone in the driveway, staring at the Massey Ferguson 8737. It was just him and the machine now. Spring planting started 2 weeks later. Tyler hitched the Massey to the 24-row planter, his father's planter, still John Deere green, and rolled into the first field. The engine settled into a deep, steady growl. The cab was quiet. The controls were sharp. He'd spent 3 days learning the interface, memorizing the settings, adjusting the seat and mirrors until everything felt right. The first pass was flawless. The Massey pulled hard and smooth, 370 horsepower, translating into forward momentum without hesitation. The planter tracked perfectly. The rows dropped clean. Tyler watched the monitor, checked the depth, adjusted the speed. By midday, he'd covered 60 acres. He stopped for fuel and did the math in his head. At this rate, he'd finish the whole farm in half the time it took with the smaller Deeres. And the fuel burn, even pulling a heavy planter, was lower than he'd projected. For the first time in 18 months, Tyler Harmon felt something close to hope. The optimism lasted 4 days. On the 5th day, the hydraulic pump failed. Tyler was halfway through the north section when the planter started dragging. He stopped, checked the hitch, saw fluid pooling under the Massey's belly. His stomach dropped. He called Carl. "Hydraulic pump," Carl said after a long silence. "I'll order the part." "How long?" "Week, maybe 10 days." "I don't have 10 days." "Then you better hope I can find one used." Tyler sat in the cab, staring at the empty field ahead of him. The planting window was closing. Every day he lost was a day. Corn couldn't grow, couldn't mature, couldn't make money. He called a local mechanic. Got the same answer. The part was specialized. Massey Ferguson didn't stock them locally. It had to come from the regional hub. That night, Tyler sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. If he lost 2 weeks of planting, he'd be pushing late-season corn. Lower yields, higher risk of frost damage in the fall, tighter margins, and the payment on the Massey was due in 30 days. The part arrived 9 days later. Carl installed it himself, didn't charge labor. "You're going to hit bumps," he said. "That's the deal with any machine. Deere, Massey, Case, doesn't matter. You just got to push through." Tyler nodded, didn't argue. He knew Carl was right. But when he climbed back into the Massey and fired it up, the weight of those 9 lost days sat heavy in his chest. He finished planting 3 days before the rain came. Barely made it. The crew from the co-op asked how it went. Tyler lied and said fine. They didn't need to know he'd been one pump failure away from disaster. Summer brought a different kind of test. The Massey Ferguson 8737 ran hard through June and July, cultivating, spraying, hauling grain bins into position for the fall. Tyler pushed it 12-hour days, sometimes longer. The machine never complained. The engine stayed strong. The fuel efficiency held. But the neighbors noticed. At the feed store, a guy Tyler had known since high school made a comment. "Heard you're running red now." Tyler didn't look up from the invoice he was signing. "That's right." "How's that working out?" "Fine. Heard you had a breakdown." Tyler's pen stopped. He looked up. "Hydraulic pump, fixed in a week." "A week's a long time in May. I finished planting." The guy grinned. "Barely." Tyler handed the invoice back to the clerk and walked out. He didn't need to defend his choices to men who didn't sign his checks. But the whispers followed him. At the co-op, at the diner, at church. Tyler Harmon sold his daddy's Deeres, bought a Massey. Thing broke down first month. He's going to regret it. Harvest came in late September. Tyler hooked the Massey to a grain cart and started hauling corn from the field to the bins. The machine performed exactly as advertised, strong, steady, efficient. He ran it 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, and it never missed a beat. The fuel savings were real. Tyler tracked every gallon, compared it to his father's old logs. The Massey was running 15% more efficient than the 8370R had, pulling the same loads. That efficiency was the difference between breaking even and profit. By mid-October, Tyler had most of the crop in. Yields were decent. Not spectacular, but decent. The late planting had cost him a few bushels per acre, but not enough to sink him. He sat down with the accountant the first week of November. The numbers were tight, tighter than Tyler wanted. But they worked. The Massey payment cleared. The operating loan got current. The feed bills got paid. Tyler Harmon had survived his first full season. Barely. That's when the bank called. The loan officer's voice was polite but firm. "We need to talk about your line of credit." Tyler's chest tightened. "I'm current." "You are. But your debt-to-income ratio is higher than we're comfortable with. We're going to need to see stronger cash flow next year, or we'll have to restructure." "Restructure how?" "Higher interest, shorter terms, or collateral." Tyler closed his eyes. What kind of collateral? Land. There it was. The thing his father had fought his whole life to avoid. The one line you didn't cross. You could lose equipment, you could lose pride, but you didn't lose land. "I'll make it work," Tyler said. "I hope so," the loan officer said, "because if you don't, we'll have to start those conversations." The call ended. Tyler sat in the office, staring at the wall. He'd sold every John Deere his father owned to buy one Massey Ferguson. He'd bet the entire operation on efficiency and horsepower. And now the bank was telling him it might not be enough. Winter was brutal. Not weather, money. Tyler ran the numbers 100 different ways, cut costs everywhere he could, delayed maintenance, skipped upgrades, ate cheaper, drove less. The Massey Ferguson 8737 sat in the shed, dormant and silent. Tyler walked out to look at it some nights, standing in the cold, hands in his pockets. It wasn't the machine's fault. The Massey had done everything he'd asked. It had delivered the power, the efficiency, the performance. But performance didn't matter if the bank took the land. His uncle stopped by in January. Gary didn't say, "I told you so." He just stood in the kitchen, drinking coffee, watching Tyler stare at spreadsheets. "You thinking about selling it?" Gary finally asked. "The Massey?" "Yeah." Tyler shook his head. "No." "Why not? Cut your losses. Go back to Deere. Rebuild slow. Because I didn't buy the Massey to flip it. I bought it to survive." Gary set his cup down. "And are you surviving?" Tyler didn't answer. Spring came cold and late. Tyler spent February and March scrambling. He renegotiated supplier contracts, locked in cheaper seed, found a custom applicator willing to trade labor for a percentage of yield instead of cash up front. Every decision was a calculated risk, and every risk depended on the Massey Ferguson 8737 running flawlessly. Planting started the second week of April. Tyler climbed into the Massey's cab, fired up the engine, and felt the familiar growl settle into his bones. This was it. Year 2, the year that would decide everything. The first week went perfectly. The Massey pulled strong. The planter dropped seed with precision. Tyler covered 80 acres in 3 days. Then the transmission started slipping. It was subtle at first, a slight hesitation when shifting under load. Tyler told himself it was nothing, adjusted his driving, babied the machine through the rough spots. But by the end of week 2, the slipping was worse. He called Carl. "Bring it in," Carl said. "I'm in the middle of planting." "Then you better hope it holds." It didn't. 3 days later, the transmission locked up completely. Tyler was pulling the planter through the south field when the Massey jerked to a stop, engine screaming, gears grinding. He killed the ignition and sat in the silence. Then he called Carl. "Transmission's shot," Carl said after the diagnostic. "Full replacement. I can have the part in 5 days, but the labor's going to run you 8,000. Tyler felt the air leave his lungs. 8,000. It's a big job. I don't have 8,000. Carl was quiet for a moment. "You want me to see if I can work out a payment plan? I want you to fix it fast. I'll do what I can." Tyler borrowed the money from his uncle. Gary didn't ask questions, just wrote the check and handed it over. "You pay me back when you can," he said. Tyler nodded. Didn't say thank you. Couldn't find the words. The Massey was down for 6 days. Carl and his crew worked late hours, swapped the transmission, tested the systems. When Tyler picked it up, Carl walked him through the repairs. "It'll hold," Carl said. "But you're pushing this machine hard, real hard. You need to ease up or you'll be back here before harvest." Tyler climbed into the cab. "I'll ease up when the bank eases up." He finished planting in May. Late again. Not as late as the year before, but late enough to hurt. The whispers started up again. Harmon's Massey broke down. Transmission, $8,000. Should have stuck with Deere. Summer was a war of attrition. Tyler ran the Massey cautiously, checking fluid levels daily, monitoring every sound, every vibration. He couldn't afford another breakdown, couldn't afford another loan from his uncle, couldn't afford to prove the doubters right. The machine held. June passed, July passed. August brought the pre-harvest scramble, bin prep, equipment checks, buyer negotiations. Tyler's corn looked good, better than good. The late planting hadn't hurt as much as he'd feared. The weather had cooperated, the rainfall had been consistent. If the harvest went clean, he'd make money. Real money. Enough to pay back his uncle. Enough to stabilize the operating loan. Enough to prove that selling every John Deere to buy one Massey Ferguson hadn't been insane. Harvest started the last week of September. Tyler hitched the Massey to the grain cart and rolled into the first field. The combine, a contractor he'd hired, was already running, chewing through rows, spitting corn into the cart. The Massey pulled flawlessly, strong, steady, efficient. Tyler ran 12-hour days. The machine never faltered. The fuel costs stayed low. The tonnage climbed. By the second week of October, Tyler had half the farm in. The yields were strong, higher than projected. The quality was good. The buyers were pleased. Tyler allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. Then the engine started knocking. It was faint at first, a rhythmic tick buried under the normal diesel growl. Tyler heard it on a fuel stop, standing outside the cab, listening. His stomach dropped. He called Carl. "Could be a lot of things," Carl said. "Could be nothing. Bring it in after harvest. And if it's not nothing, then we'll deal with it." Tyler climbed back in the cab and kept working. The knocking got louder. By the end of the week, it was unmistakable, a deep, metallic rattle that vibrated through the entire machine. Tyler knew what it meant: bearing failure, piston damage, something expensive. He had 200 acres left to harvest. He pushed the Massey through every one of them. The machine screamed. The knock turned into a roar. Tyler ignored it, kept the throttle steady, kept the grain moving. On the last day of harvest, the engine seized. Tyler was hauling the final load when the Massey shuddered, coughed, and died. He coasted to a stop in the middle of the field, grain cart half full, silence ringing in his ears. He sat in the cab for a long time. Then he called Carl. The engine rebuild cost $14,000. Tyler didn't have it. His uncle didn't have it. The bank sure as hell wasn't offering it. Carl offered a solution. "I'll cover the parts and labor. You pay me back over 2 years, 5% interest." Tyler stared at the floor. Why would you do that? Because you're not the first guy to bet everything on one machine, and you won't be the last. Tyler signed the agreement. The Massey was down for 3 weeks. By the time it was running again, the harvest was over. The grain was sold. The checks were deposited. Tyler sat down with the accountant. The profit from the harvest, after all expenses, all repairs, all loan payments, was enough to cover the operating costs for the next year. Barely. Tyler Harmon had survived year 2, but the weight of it had aged him. That winter, Tyler's uncle came by with a proposition. "There's a guy 2 counties over," Gary said, "looking to buy a Massey Ferguson 8737. He'll pay you what you owe on it. You walk away clean." Tyler looked up from the paperwork. "And then what?" "Then you rebuild, smaller, smarter, maybe a good used Deere. Something you can afford to maintain." Tyler shook his head. "I'm not selling." "Tyler, I said I'm not selling." Gary sighed. "You're going to kill yourself on this thing." "Maybe, but I'm going to do it my way." Gary left. Tyler walked out to the shed and stood in front of the Massey Ferguson 8737. The machine looked tired, scarred. The paint was chipped from 2 brutal seasons. The tires were worn. The cab smelled like diesel and sweat, but the engine, freshly rebuilt, was strong. Tyler climbed into the cab and sat in the driver's seat. He didn't start it, just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield at the empty field beyond. He'd sold every John Deere his father owned to buy this machine. He'd lost sleep, lost money, lost respect. But he hadn't lost the farm. Not yet. Year 3 started different. Tyler had learned. He'd pushed the Massey too hard, too fast, and it had cost him. So he adjusted, scheduled maintenance religiously, monitored fluid levels obsessively, ran the machine within its limits. Planting went smooth. No breakdowns, no delays. The Massey pulled strong and steady, 370 horsepower, doing exactly what Tyler had bought it to do. The neighbors still whispered. The Deere dealers still smirked. But Tyler didn't care anymore. He'd made his choice, and he was living with it. By the end of year 3, Tyler Harmon had turned a profit. Not a big one, but enough to pay down debt, enough to rebuild a little cash reserve, enough to prove that one Massey Ferguson, pushed to its absolute limit, could carry a farm. His uncle stopped by in December. Gary stood in the shop looking at the Massey. It was cleaner now. Tyler had washed it, detailed it, treated it like the asset it was. "You still think you made the right call?" Gary asked. Tyler didn't hesitate. "I think I made the only call I could. Your daddy wouldn't have done it." "I know." Gary nodded slowly. "But maybe that's okay." Tyler looked at his uncle. "You think?" "I think you're still here. Farm's still running. That counts for something." Gary left. Tyler stood alone with the Massey Ferguson 8737. It wasn't a John Deere. It never would be. The resale value was still garbage. The parts were still hard to find. The neighbors still talked. But it was his, and it had kept him alive.